Dear student, welcome with us to our commercial subject group level 2 in account 111. We will cover today chapter 2, and it is about the accounting in action. Our learning objective for this lesson: at the end of this lesson, the student should be able to understand the accounting equation and the define of its component. Second, explain the type of assets, liability, and owner equity. Finally, analyze the effect of business transaction on the accounting equation. First of all, let us take a look and understand the accounting equation and define the component on it. We will start firstly with assets. What we mean by assets, my dear student? Assets are a company's resource with a future benefit, things company own or control. So all the resource the company, they have it and get benefit from it. Then what we mean by liability, my student? The liabilities are company obligation and amount that the company owns. Finally, what we mean by the owner equity? The owner equity is the property, rights, and claims of the business owner. By that, we know the component of the accounting equation. Now, my dear student, after we take a look about the component of the accounting equation, let us take an example for this component. Firstly, if I will discuss the assets, there is many examples for the assets, the resource of the company. First of it, cash, supplies, account receivable, and the furniture, premises, a track, and machinery. This is some examples of the assets. Moving to the second component of the accounting equation, which is the liability. And let us take an example for the liability. The liability will have the loans, account payable, note payable, interest payable, and mortgage payable. Finally, we will shift to the third part of the accounting equation, and it will be the owner's equity. And we have some examples for the owner equity, starting with the capitals, investment, revenues, expense, and it's end with the drawing. Take a look for this activity. Let us see which formula is the best formula or the right formula for the accounting equation. Try to guess, my dear students, the right equation. Now, let us see the right answer. The first equation is the right answer. The first equation is constant of the assets will be equal to the liability, and I will add with it the owner equity of the company to get the assets. Let us take an activity to have more experience with the account. I have it, and I will use it in the accounting equation. I have, dear student, here many accounts, and I should classify it as assets, liability, and owner equity. And when I mention the owner equity, I should specify if it revenue or expense. Please take a few minutes to take to take a look about the accounts. After taking a look, my dear student, to the different activity we have it. So let us start with the classification. Starting with the first account, I have the note receivable. The note receivable will be an asset. Moving to the fees income, and it will be the revenue. And I know the revenue type of an owner equity. Office equipment, it will be an asset. The loan will be a liabilities. The track will be an asset. Insurance expense will be an expense, and as I know, it's a type in owner equity. Machinery, it's an asset. And then I have the account payable, and it's be a liability. Then the capital, I know it will be an owner equity. And finally, the drawing, it is also an owner equity. Moving to find the figures of the component in our accounting equation. In this schedule, I have my accounting equation, which is constant of assets equal liability plus the owner equity. Let us apply it here. Under the assets, I have many types of assets. In our example, I take an example of cash, equipment, and supplies. In the liability section, we took the account payable. And in owner equity, we take the capital. Let us take a look for the first example. If I have all the figures for all this account, but I need to find the liability in this example. How can I get the liability in this example? Applying the first equation, I should take the assets, and I have it. I have 10,000, 3,200, and 8,000. I should take the total of assets and subtract the owner equity from it, which is 8,000, and I will get the liability. This one for the first equation. On the second example, I have the assets, I have the cash, equipment, but I miss the supplies. And in the liability section, I have the liability figure, which is 15,000, and also I have the owner equity with 23,500. I need to get the assets. So, third, also I have the assets except the cash, and I have the liability and owner equity. After explaining the first one, can you guess, my dear student, how can we get the figure in the second and the third example? After you think, my dear student, about the missing figure, let us see how can we find the missing figure. As we say, for the first one, I take the total assets and I subtract the owner equity 8,000 from it, and I get the liability of 6,000. For the assets, I have the total of liability plus the owner equity, and it will be equal to assets. I should keep it equal. So the difference will be the number of the supplies. Also, if I shift for the third equation or third example, also I can apply the same equation. I take the total of liability plus the owner equity, and then getting the difference between it, and it will be the figure of the cash. Moving to other activity, my dear student, let us read the first one. If the liability is 20,000, this figure for the liability, and the owner will be 80,000 for the owner equity, then how much will be the assets? The second, if the owner equity is 6,000, this will be the owner equity, and the assets is 10,000. So how much will be the liability? Take a few minutes to think about it. After you finish thinking, my dear student, let us check our answer. For the first one, the liability is 20,000. The owner equity is 80,000. So how can we get the assets? The missing figure is the assets. So our answer is 100,000. How can we get this answer? I will see the assets equal liability plus the owner equity. Let us apply this equation. The liability, I have it, is 20,000 plus the owner equity that I have it, which is 80,000. Then the assets will be 100,000, as we see in our answer. Next, if the owner equity is 6,000 and the assets is 10,000, what about the liability? If I want to get the liability, how can I apply this equation? It will be assets minus the owner equity. My answer is 4,000. How can I get this figure? I have the assets of 10,000. I will subtract the owner equity from it, which is 6,000. So I will get liability of 4,000. Then, my dear student, let us take a look about our equation and explain it in more details. I have the assets. It will be equal to the liability plus the owner equity. But in the owner equity side, I have two parts. The first part will increase the owner equity of the company, and the other part will decrease the owner equity of the company. what's the account that will increase the owner equity and what's the account that will decrease the owner equity. The account will increase the owner equity of the company as the capital and the revenue. And the account will decrease the owner equity of the capital will be the expense and the drawing. Now I will move to the analysis of the effect of business and a transaction on the accounting equation. In our activity, I have a transaction, and each transaction it will affect some accounts. Let's take a look about our transaction. The first transaction is investment by the owner. If I want to invest, what the type of account will affect? I should notice that in each transaction, as a minimum, 2 accounts will affect. It can be more than 2 accounts, but cannot be less than 2 accounts. So, the first one, Amna invests 10,000 BD for a cash in the business. Let us see the key word in our transaction. Invest and cash. What it means? The invest, if I invest, so my owner equity will increase and specifically will increase in the capital account. What type of investment I do it? I invest in the cash. And I know the cash is an example of an asset. So the assets account for my company will increase. If I want to show this transaction in the table I have it, I will come to the assets part under cash account, and it will be increased by 10,000 that I have invested. So I will enter here in transaction number 1, 10,000, and I will put a plus sign because show that my cash is increased. Then the invested, I say that it will increase the capital of the company. So I will move to the owner equity section under the capital account, and I will put 10,000, and also I will put the sign of the plus to show that the capital of the company is increased. This is for the first transaction. Moving to the second transaction. Amna invests 5,000 BD for equipment in the business. The key word for me, the equipment and also the investment. Invest, I know that it will increase the capital of my company. The equipment is a type of an asset. So my asset section will increase under the equipment section. Returning back to our schedule, in transaction number 2, I will come to the section of assets under the equipment account, and I will increase it by 5,000, and I should add the sign of plus to show that the account in equipment will increase. The effect of investment will affect on the capital of the company. So I will move to the owner equity under the capital section, and I will increase it in transaction number 2 by 5,000, and be careful, you should put the sign of a plus to show that the account will increase. After I finish the transaction 1 and transaction 2, I should do the balance after this two transactions. I will make the balance for all the accounts I have it in each section. Coming to the section of account, under the account of cash, only I have in transaction 1, the 10,000. In transaction 2, I don't have anything, so the balance will be 10,000. In the account receivable, there is nothing. Moving to the equipment, in the transaction number 2, I have 5,000. I don't have any transaction before, so the total or the balance will be 5,000. Moving to the other account, I don't have any transaction related to machine and account payable in the liability section. Shifting to the section of owner's equity, under the capital, I start in the transaction 1 with 10,000 and then moving to the second transaction and my account increase by 5,000. So at the end, I reach 15,000. 10,000 plus the 5,000. It will be the total. In the owner equity section, the total will be 15,000 because I don't have other figure in this section. And shifting to the assets, I will take the total of cash plus the total of equipment. The other account, there is no figure on it. And I will get the 15,000. Applying to my figure, to my equation, the assets should be equal, the total of liability and the owner equity. In the asset section, the total is 15,000. On the liability, I don't have, it will be 0. And in the owner equity, it's 15,000. So the total will be equal between assets and liability plus owner equity. Moving to the next activity, the effect will be on the purchase of assets. Let us take an example in the transaction we have it. Amna purchased equipment for a cash by 3,000. Let us check the keyword in our transaction. Purchase equipment. So the equipment in our company will increase. And also I pay for this equipment by cash. So the cash for me or for my company will decrease. The effect on this transaction, the equipment is an asset and the cash also is an asset. So if the equipment, it will increase. So let us see it on our schedule. Moving to the transaction 3. Now let us see the effect on the equipment in our schedule. Going to the asset section and going to the equipment account, I will increase it by 3,000 because I purchase more equipment in my company. When I purchase this equipment, I pay it by cash. So my cash will decrease. Coming to the transaction 3, cash account, I will decrease it by 3,000. Shifting to the fourth transaction, Amna purchased machine for 4,000 on credit from Jamal establishment. If I buy a machine, so the machine for my company will increase and on credit. So I know that I didn't pay for this machine. So this will be a liability to my company. Showing this transaction in the table, going to the transaction 4, the machine in my company will increase. Going to the machine account under the assets section, and it will be increased by 4,000. Shifting to the liability of my company, it will increase by 4,000. Why it's increased the liability? Because I didn't pay the price or the cost of this machine. Moving to the last transaction in this part, Amna paid to creditor Jamal establishment for PD 1,500. Before, in transaction 4, I have a liability of 4,000. In transaction 5, I pay part of this liability. If it paid, so the cash for me will decrease. So I will come to the asset section under the cash for transaction 5 and I will decrease the cash by 1,500. Then if I pay the liability that I have it, so the liability for me will decrease, and because that I come to the liability section under the account payable and I decrease it by 1,500. Finally, as I know I should find the balance for all the transaction, I do it to keep the assets equal the liability plus owner equity. Moving to the third transaction or the third effect, providing or perform a service. Let us take an example. Amna perform repair service to a customer for a cash. When I perform a service, I will get a revenue. So the revenue for my company will increase. Coming to the sixth transaction, if the revenue for my company will increase, I will come to the owner equity section under the revenue section and I will increase it by 2,000. Then, does I receive this amount of a transaction? Yes, I receive this amount. So, if I receive it, then the cash in my company will increase. So, I will come here and increase it by 2,000. Moving to the second transaction, Amna provided repair service on credit to Maha by 3,000. If I provide a service directly, I will gain a revenue. So, coming to the owner's equity section, under revenue, I gain a profit of 3,000. But my dear student, does I receive the amount of 3,000 that I performed service for it? No, I didn't receive the amount. I'm waiting to receive this amount from Maha. So, coming to the asset section, under account receivable account, and I will increase it by 3,000. Why I put it on account receivable? This account, the money I wait to receive it from the customer. So, because that I increase it. Moving to the last transaction in this section, Amna received cash from Maha with amount of 1,500. In transaction 7, I provide service to Maha, but I didn't receive the amount. Now, in this transaction, I received actually the amount. So, coming to the cash, and it will be increased by the amount I receive it. So, it will increase by 1,500. The amount that I'm waiting to receive, now I receive it actually. So, I will decrease the amount that I waiting to receive because I receive it. I will decrease it by 1,500. After finishing this transaction, I should find the balance of all the accounts and try to make a balance between the asset side and the side of total liability and owner equity. Next, moving to the expense section. Let us take a look about the transaction. We have it in this section, my dear student. Amna paid 500 for salary expense. Coming to the transaction number 9, if I paid 500, so if I paid, the cash in my company will decrease. Coming to the cash account, I will decrease it by 500, the amount that I paid. Moving to salary expense, I will shift to the owner equity section under the expense and I will decrease it by 500 because I pay this expense. Then, incurred advertising expense for 800 on account. If I incurred this expense, coming to the expense section, I will decrease it by 800 and does I paid this expense? I didn't pay it yet. So, it is a liability for my company. I will come to the liability section. Under the account payable, I will increase it by 800 because I didn't pay this expense yet. Finally, as I know, I should find the balance for all accounts and I should make the total to make our equation is balanced. Moving to the drawing section. Amna withdraw cash of 1,000 for personal use. If I draw an amount from my account, directly I know that my cash account will affect by decreasing the amount in the cash account. And then I know the withdrawal or the drawing is an example under the owner equity. So coming to the section of owner equity, under the drawing, I will increase it by 1,000. And finally, as I know, I should find the balance of each account and keeping my equation equal the asset side with the total side of total liability and owner equity. Let us take an exercise, my dear student. The exercise we have indicate the multiple effect on the account equation of the business using the plus for the increase and using the minus for the decrease and not effect for the transaction that there is no effect on it. You have few minutes to take a look about the transaction. We have it. Now, after you take a look about the transaction, we have it. Let us check our answer, my dear student. For the first transaction, the owner invests cash in the business. Where will be the effect? If I invest directly, the owner equity will increase, and I invest in the cash, and the cash is type of an asset, so the assets will increase. There will be no effect in the liability section. For the second transaction, the owner withdraw business assets for personal use. If I withdraw, I know the withdrawal, it will be affect the owner equity of the company. So it will decrease the owner equity. And if I withdraw a money, the cash in my company will decrease. So the cash is type of an asset and it will be decreased. Thirdly, the company receive a cash from a bank loan. If I receive a cash, the cash in my company will increase, and I know the cash is a type of an asset. The bank loan, it's mean I have a liability, and the liability will increase for me in my company. Fourth, the company repays the bank that had lent money to the company. If the company repay, so it will decrease the cash, I have it, and the cash I know it's an assets account. And if I pay for the money I lent it, so the liability also will decrease. Moving to the fifth transaction, the company purchase equipment with its cash. If I purchase equipment, the equipment will increase. And I know that the equipment is an asset, and this asset will increase. And I pay cash, the cash for it will decrease. And I know the cash is also an asset. So the effect, both of them will be on the asset side. One increase when I'm buying the equipment, and the other will decrease when I pay the cash. The sixth transaction, the company purchased a significant amount of supplies on credit. So the effect will be increasing in assets and also increasing in liability. The company purchased land by paying half in cash and signing a note payable for the other half. So I purchased a land. The land is an asset for me. So the assets will increase. Does I pay the amount of this land? Yes, I pay just half of the amount. So the cash also will decrease in the asset side by half of the amount. And what about the other half of the amount? It will be a liability for me. So the liability for me will increase. The effect on this transaction, once will decrease in the asset side. For the cash I pay it, the increase side for the land, and the liability for me will increase. By that, my dear student, we reach our end of lesson. At the end, my student should achieve the following objective: understanding the accounting equation and define the component of it. Second, explain the type of assets, liability, and owner equity. And finally, ended with analyzing the effect of business transaction on the accounting equation. Thank you for your attention, my dear student. And for any more information, you can visit the Ministry of Education website, or you can take a look about the exercise and activity in your school book. Thank you, my dear student, for your attention, and see you on the next lesson.